Hey guys, welcome back to another long, slow walk through history. So if you're settling in for bed, go ahead and get comfortable. Dim the lights, shuffle your pillow around until it stops judging you. Tonight, we're drifting way, way back, farther than your Wi-Fi can reach, to ancient Egypt. And we're going to talk about something that everyone thinks they already know about, but really, almost nobody does. Yep, the pyramids. Those giant, sandy triangles that have somehow outlived entire civilizations, multiple empires, and probably at least 3 of your phone chargers. And yeah, we're doing the whole how did they build them thing, but we're going to do it in the most calm, mildly sarcastic, bedtime-friendly way possible. No aliens, no conspiracies. Just humans, limestone, and an unreasonable amount of teamwork that would make any modern workplace feel personally attacked. So let's go ahead and stretch a bit. Let your brain wander. And when you're ready, we're floating back about 4,500 years to a river that never minded flooding a little too often, the Nile. So the first thing you need to know is that ancient Egypt wasn't constantly building pyramids. It wasn't like this was their main hobby for 4,000 years. In fact, the whole pyramid obsession lasted only a few centuries. A few kings woke up one morning and said, "I want a giant stone triangle to store my mummified body." And somehow everyone else went, "Yeah, seems reasonable." And then the trend moved on. But during that golden period, long before Cleopatra, long before Tutankhamun, they really committed. And I mean retail therapy level committed. The kind of commitment you feel when you buy gym clothes in January and pretend you'll definitely use them. The earliest version of the pyramid wasn't even a real pyramid. It was more like a stack of increasingly confused rectangles. And we can thank one man for that: Imhotep. Yes, the same Imhotep whose name Hollywood stole for their sandy undead boyfriend. In real life, Imhotep was an architect, a priest, a doctor, and probably the annoying kid in school who got straight A's without trying. He worked for King Djoser around 2700 BCE, and he came up with the step pyramid. Imagine someone trying to build a skyscraper but giving up halfway and deciding, stairs, that's enough. It was a groundbreaking design, though, and more importantly, it was the first monumental structure made entirely of stone. Before that, people were still messing around with mud brick, which, as you might guess, ages about as well as a pastry left in the sun. So Djoser gets his giant limestone birthday cake, Imhotep becomes an ancient celebrity, and the Egyptian elite suddenly start looking at their sad, normal tombs thinking, "Okay, so where's my pyramid?" And this is when things get delightfully messy. The next generation of pharaohs decided they wanted real pyramids, smooth-sided, geometric perfection, architectural flexing at its finest. But naturally, no one actually knew how to do that yet. So like anyone trying something complicated for the first time, assembling furniture, doing taxes, making a TikTok, they messed up a lot. Enter King Sneferu, ancient Egypt's most hard-working overachiever. Sneferu built 3 pyramids, which is adorable because you can practically see the trial and error happening in real time. His first attempt? The Medum Pyramid, also known as that one that partially collapsed because nobody did the math. It started as another step pyramid, but Sneferu wanted those smooth sides. The builders tried to cover the steps with limestone shell. Unfortunately, the project managers apparently skipped a few meetings because most of that shell slid off centuries later. Today, the thing looks like a broken cake missing all its frosting. It's the architectural equivalent of forgetting your homework at home. Sneferu's second attempt is legendary among history nerds, the Bent Pyramid. It starts climbing at a steep angle, like the workers were feeling bold that day, and then halfway up, it suddenly changes direction, like an ancient engineer took one look at the stress cracks forming and said, "Nope, not today," and changed the angle to avoid total disaster. And honestly, respect. Self-awareness is rare in ancient monumental construction. Finally, Sneferu gets it right with the Red Pyramid, the first real, fully smooth-sided pyramid in history. It's huge, stable, and still standing there today like, yeah, I'm the one your history teacher should have talked about. Of course, Neferu probably didn't get to see all of this from inside, considering the ancient Egyptian burial traditions that tended to involve a lot of waiting until after death, but still, his builders learned something crucial: how to make a pyramid that didn't collapse from existential dread. And now we arrive at the big one: Khufu, Sneferu's son, the man who looked at his father's 3 pyramids and said, "Cool, I'm going to build one bigger than all of them combined because I'm the main character." Khufu's project would become the Great Pyramid of Giza. And yes, it's great. Not your friend's cooking great, not my Wi-Fi actually worked today great, but genuinely great. One of the few monuments on Earth that can handle 4,500 years of weather and still look like it could host a TED Talk. Let's talk about scale for a second. When it was new, before the outer casing stones were stripped, it was a glistening white limestone, totally smooth, mathematically precise mountain, the kind of thing that makes modern engineers squint and whisper, "How?" It had about 2.3 million blocks in it, some weighing 2 to 3 tons, some weighing the amount of guilt you feel when you ignore a message but still post on Instagram. And yeah, we're doing the whole "how did they build them" thing, but we're going to do it in the most calm, mildly sarcastic, bedtime-friendly way possible. No aliens, no conspiracies, just humans, limestone, and an unreasonable amount of teamwork that would make any modern workplace feel personally attacked. So let's go ahead and stretch a bit, let your brain wander, and when you're ready, we're floating back about 4,500 years to a river that never minded flooding a little too often: the Nile. So the first thing you need to know is that ancient Egypt wasn't constantly building pyramids. It wasn't like this was their main hobby for 4,000 years. In fact, the whole pyramid obsession lasted only a few centuries. A few kings woke up one morning and said, "I want a giant stone triangle to store my mummified body." And somehow everyone else went, "Yeah, seems reasonable." And then the trend moved on. But during that golden period, long before Cleopatra, long before Tutankhamun, they really committed. And I mean retail therapy level committed. The kind of commitment you feel when you buy gym clothes in January and pretend you'll definitely use them. The earliest version of the pyramid wasn't even a real pyramid. It was more like a stack of increasingly confused rectangles. And we can thank one man for that: Imhotep. Yes, the same Imhotep whose name Hollywood stole for their sandy undead boyfriend. In real life, Imhotep was an architect, a priest, a doctor, and probably the annoying kid in school who got straight A's without trying. He worked for King Djoser around 2700 BCE, and he came up with the step pyramid. Imagine someone trying to build a skyscraper but giving up halfway and deciding, stairs, that's enough. It was a groundbreaking design, though, and more importantly, it was the first monumental structure made entirely of stone. Before that, people were still messing around with mud brick, which, as you might guess, ages about as well as a pastry left in the sun. So Djoser gets his giant limestone birthday cake, Imhotep becomes an ancient celebrity, and the Egyptian elite suddenly start looking at their sad, normal tombs thinking, "Okay, so where's my pyramid?" And this is when things get delightfully messy. The next generation of pharaohs decided they wanted real pyramids: smooth-sided, geometric perfection, architectural flexing at its finest. But naturally, no one actually knew how to do that yet. So, like anyone trying something complicated for the first time, assembling furniture, doing taxes, making a TikTok, they messed up a lot. Enter King Sneferu, ancient Egypt's most hard-working overachiever. Sneferu built 3 pyramids, which is adorable because you can practically see the trial and error happening in real time. His first attempt? The Medum Pyramid, also known as that one that partially collapsed because nobody did the math. It started as another step pyramid, but Sneferu wanted those smooth sides.
The builders tried to cover the steps with limestone shell. Unfortunately, the project managers apparently skipped a few meetings because most of that shell slid off centuries later. Today, the thing looks like a broken cake missing all its frosting. It's the architectural equivalent of forgetting your homework at home. Sneferu's second attempt is legendary among history nerds, the bent pyramid. It starts climbing at a steep angle, like the workers were feeling bold that day, and then halfway up, it suddenly changes direction, like an ancient engineer took one look at the stress cracks forming and said, "Nope, not today," and changed the angle to avoid total disaster. And honestly, respect. Self-awareness is rare in ancient monumental construction. Finally, Sneferu gets it right with the Red Pyramid, the first real, fully smooth-sided pyramid in history. It's huge.
All right, welcome back. If you're still awake, impressive. If you're already half floating in the dream dimension, that just means the script is doing its job. Either way, let's settle into the next stretch of our very slow walk through ancient Egypt's grand building obsession. We left off with the big boys of Giza already towering over the desert, which means it's time to look a little closer. We're drifting from the outside of the pyramids toward the people who actually built them. Not the glorious names carved into king's lists, but the thousands of dusty, sunburned humans doing the literal heavy lifting. Because here's the thing. When we imagine pyramid workers, we often picture ragged, hopeless slaves dragging stones while dramatic music plays in the background. But real archaeology disagrees, politely but firmly, like a librarian telling you to keep it down. The workers were not enslaved. They were organized, fed, medically treated, and given actual wages, which is more than you can say for half of history's workforce. Honestly, some modern jobs could learn a thing or two from the 4th Dynasty HR department. Let's take a slow walk into their world. The main labor force lived in what's now called the Workers' Village at Giza. Think of it as an ancient construction campus. You had long barrack-style living quarters, storage buildings, bakeries, breweries, and a surprising number of administrative offices. Because apparently, even in 2600 BCE, paperwork was already a thing. The barracks were simple but solid. Rows of small rooms, usually shared, beds made of mud brick and reed mats. Not luxury, but far from the suffering prison cells people imagine. And within these walls, you can picture the workers at night, exhausted but proud, joking around, sharing food, complaining about supervisors, human things. Archaeologists found bread molds everywhere. The Egyptians loved bread so much that their garbage piles looked like an ancient bakery exploded. Add to that beer, which was thick, nutritious, and about as alcoholic as a modern smoothie. Workers drank it constantly, partly because the Nile water wasn't always safe, and partly because beer was cheap calories. Imagine building a pyramid while on the world's slowest liquid diet. They also ate beef, goat, fish, onions, and dates, a sturdy working person's diet. Definitely better than the sad instant noodles you've eaten at 2 a.m. And yes, they had doctors, plenty of them. We know because their bones show injuries, broken arms, crushed toes, herniated vertebrae that healed correctly. A poorly treated fracture is obvious in skeletal remains. A professionally set one is equally obvious. This means someone was there, carefully resetting bones, binding limbs, and making sure the workforce didn't fall apart. You don't invest in medical care for slaves. You invest in medical care for valued labor. So if anyone ever tells you pyramids were built by tortured slaves, you can gently, sleepily correct them. Actually, the workers were well-fed professionals with a surprisingly strong union vibe. Now let's drift over to the organization of the workforce. Egyptians loved teams, loved them. They ran construction like a giant group project, the kind where you actually trust your teammates and nobody takes 3 weeks to reply to the group chat. The workforce was divided into squads called files, which were split into crews and then into smaller groups of about 10 to 20 men.
Each group had a name, and some of the names read like ancient inside jokes. We've got graffiti that says things like the Friends of Khufu, the Drunkards of Menkaure, a personal favorite, the Western Gang, the Vigorous Crew. It's that little detail, their own team names scribbled on big limestone blocks, that makes the entire project feel so human, so modern. You can almost hear someone shouting, "Hey, did the Vigorous Crew finish their quota, or are they still on lunch?" These marks also helped engineers keep track of where stones belonged. If you're assembling 2 million blocks, labeling things is essential. Even the ancient Egyptians didn't trust themselves to remember where everything went, which is comforting. At the top of the pyramid operation were the supervisors, overseers with shaved heads, clipped beards, and very serious expressions. Their job was to coordinate labor, manage supplies, and probably tell people to push harder, even though they weren't doing any pushing themselves. Management hasn't changed much. Above them were the architects and priests, the big-brained strategists with scrolls full of diagrams, calculations, and spiritual blueprints. Their job was to make sure the structure aligned both with earthly physics and sacred cosmology, multitasking at its finest. Let's float toward the engineering side of things now, because if there's one thing ancient Egyptians loved more than bread, it's making things unnecessarily precise. The pyramids weren't random piles of rock. Their base corners align almost perfectly with the 4 cardinal directions. That's impressive today. In ancient 2600 BCE, it's borderline petty. But Egyptians loved cosmic alignment like modern people love aligning picture frames with laser levels. So how did they do it? They used a simple, elegant tool, a gnome, which is basically a fancy stick that casts a shadow. By observing shadow lengths throughout the day, they could find true north. Not kind of north, actual north, within a fraction of a degree. Once they established the axis, they laid out the base of the pyramid using ropes coated with resin to prevent stretching. Skilled surveyors, yes, they had surveyors, would pace the planned outline, marking corners with limestone stakes. Then the digging began. The topsoil was removed until they hit bedrock, which formed the foundation. This ensured stability and prevented long-term sinking. You don't spend decades building a giant stone triangle only to have it tilt like a sad birthday hat. So the Egyptians used channels filled with water to find the level. Water doesn't lie, it sits perfectly horizontal, no matter what. The workers carved out shallow trenches, filled them, and used the water line as a guide to trim the bedrock and set the first stone layer. This is surprisingly soothing to imagine. Dozens of workers kneeling beside still pools of water, quietly adjusting stones, waiting for tiny ripples to settle. Ancient ASMR. Now let's think about the actual building blocks. Most limestone blocks were quarried right next to the construction site. Quarriers cut deep trenches around a block, inserted wooden wedges along the base, and soaked the wedges with water. The wood expanded and popped the block loose. It's a simple trick, but incredibly effective, like breaking ice cubes out of a tray, but, heavier. Then you had to drag the block. Each block sat on a wooden sledge. Workers lubed the sand with water to reduce friction. Experiments show that a single team of men could easily drag multi-ton blocks this way. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked, slow and steady. And in pyramid building, slow and steady was basically the national motto. Once blocks arrived at the site, they were placed by masons who shaped them with copper chisels, dolerite pounding stones, and wooden mallets. Copper is soft, so tools had to be resharpened constantly. Ancient Egypt had knife sharpeners working full-time, probably wondering why they didn't choose quieter careers like papyrus weaving. Higher up the pyramid, the temporary ramps came into play. And again, nobody is completely certain how these ramps looked, because Egyptians didn't bother to leave a diagram titled, "Our ramp, please use responsibly." But the evidence suggests a hybrid approach, a long, straight ramp for the lower levels and then smaller zigzag or spiral ramps around the upper tiers. It's a practical compromise, much like using both hands and feet when climbing onto your bed after a long day. As the pyramid grew taller, workers used levers to slide blocks into place. Wooden levers, ropes, and a lot of teamwork. No magic, no mystery, just thousands of determined humans quietly doing math with their muscles. Now that we've covered the outside, let's drift gently inside. The internal chambers weren't constructed by hollowing out space. They were constructed from the ground up as the pyramid was built. Think of them as secret rooms being swallowed layer by the surrounding stone. In the Great Pyramid, the most spectacular feature is the Great Gallery, a long, steep, corbelled passageway. It's so precisely constructed that you'd think laser levels were involved, but no, just humans with string and dedication. The king's chamber sits above it, made of huge granite beams hauled from Aswan. Those beams weigh as much as 50 tons each. Egyptians lifted them using ramps and levers, then placed them in layers to distribute weight. Above the chamber are smaller relieving chambers, not for air, not for burials, just to stop the roof from collapsing on the pharaoh's eternal nap. It's like ancient stress management. If we put enough granite above this room, the granite above that granite will chill out. And surprisingly, it worked. Of course, none of this engineering exists without the religious beliefs that motivated it. Egyptians didn't build pyramids because they were bored or because of...
Welcome back. If you've made it all the way to part 3, congratulations. You are either very dedicated, very relaxed, or very asleep with your headphones still in. All 3 are valid lifestyles. Tonight, we're drifting through the final stretch of the pyramid story, the slow fade-out, the long exhale, the part where ancient Egypt looks back at its giant stone triangles and collectively goes, "Yeah, we really did that." We're not chasing mysteries. We're not decoding alien blueprints. We're just gently walking through the last phase of pyramid building, how that era ended, and how these structures managed to outlast basically everything else in human history, including half the civilizations that came after. So let's wander our way to the finish line. By the time the 4th dynasty wrapped up its stone-slinging glory days, Egypt had already created some of the most iconic monuments ever attempted. Which is kind of funny because they weren't trying to impress tourists in breathable fishing hats. They just wanted their kings to have decent afterlife real estate. But as with all big historical phases, reality eventually intrudes. Economies shift. Priests get louder. Administrators get, well, administrative. And somewhere between the daily grain rations and the annual Nile floods, the Egyptians began questioning whether pyramids were still the vibe. This wasn't sudden. The Pyramid Age didn't fall apart with dramatic collapse or alien abduction. It just faded, slowly, like a campfire burning down until only warm embers remain. Let's float through the reasons, gently, calmly, without overthinking. First, money. Turns out building giant stone mountains is expensive. Who knew? Khufu had enormous resources and a very centralized government, but later pharaohs inherited a kingdom where the priesthood was gaining power. Priests controlled land. Land produced wealth. Wealth meant influence, and influence meant that even a king couldn't just say, "Hey, let's build a 5 million-ton monument for myself," without someone raising an eyebrow behind a curtain of incense smoke. Then you had the administration bloat problem, a favorite in all civilizations.
Over time, more people got fancy titles, more officials needed salaries, more public works needed funding, and the pyramid budget started looking like an overextended credit card bill. And then there was time. Pyramids take decades. If you're an ambitious pharaoh but only expect to reign for 12 years, you're probably not starting the world's largest building project. That's like beginning a 5,000-episode TV series when you know you only have a month of Wi-Fi left. So instead of giant pyramids, later kings opted for smaller ones, then moved to tombs dug deep into cliffs, easier to hide, easier to decorate, and far less likely to get robbed. Because, yes, that's another factor: tomb robbers. Egyptians tried everything: curses, guards, secret chambers, fake passages, but nothing stopped determined thieves with free time and a chisel. A giant pyramid shimmering in the desert basically screamed, "Hello, treasure's inside, please come in." Not the best security strategy. So the Egyptians pivoted, but even as they changed their burial style, they still looked back at the old pyramids as symbols of a golden age, the way we look at classic movies we don't actually want to remake. Now, with the pyramid era drifting into its quiet retirement, let's take a calm detour into the idea of legacy. When we talk about ancient achievements, people often imagine civilizations acting with dramatic awareness, as if Egyptians thought their pyramids would define world history. But in reality, they built these things for themselves, for their kings, for their own world view. The fact that the pyramids still stand is almost an accident, a lucky combination of desert climate, stone density, and the Egyptians' stubborn refusal to take shortcuts on foundation leveling. Many of their temples, palaces, and houses are gone, washed away, buried, broken, recycled, but the pyramids endured, not because they were sacred, just because they were too heavy to move, too difficult to dismantle, and too visible to forget. That's the quiet humor of history. Civilizations try so hard to preserve the fancy stuff, the art, the writing, the libraries, but the things that survive are usually the ones no one could reasonably haul away. The pyramids stayed because they were inconvenient, and that's their secret superpower. Now, let's drift to something more personal, the workers who built these monuments, because we spend so much time talking about the pharaohs that we forget about the humans whose footprints are still preserved in dried mud beside unfinished blocks. Tool marks left by calloused hands, fingerprints inside hardened plaster, soot from lunch fires trapped between layers of stone, a doodle on a wall showing workers pulling a sled, probably drawn on a break. These tiny things tell more truth than grand inscriptions. The Egyptians didn't build the pyramids with magic, or with pain, or with secret knowledge lost to time. They built them with ordinary people doing ordinary tasks over and over, with surprising skill and patience. One of the soothing truths is that ancient humans were just as capable, sometimes more, than we assume. They didn't create miracles, they created systems. Systems powered by bread, beer, community, routine, and belief. Belief that the world had order, that the king mattered, that life flowed in cycles, that the afterlife was real, and that building something massive helped keep the universe in balance. Imagine working under that mindset. Slow, simple days, a clear purpose, and the desert sun warming your back as you chip away at a block destined for eternity. No wonder they stuck with it for centuries. Let's float deeper into afterlife beliefs, because they're essential to the pyramid story. Egyptians didn't fear death the way modern people do. For them, death was a transformation, inconvenient, sure, but manageable with the right paperwork and travel supplies. The pyramid wasn't just a tomb, it was a cosmic vessel, a lighthouse, a destination for the soul's reunion with divine forces. Inside the burial chamber, the air was still, cool, and dim. The walls sometimes painted with stars, the sarcophagus carved carefully to protect the royal body. Nearby, miniature boats symbolizing the pharaoh's journey with the sun god. Jars for offerings, statues to serve him, everything placed with ritual precision. To modern minds, it might seem excessive. To the Egyptians, it was compassion. Help the king, and he helps you, even from beyond, a mutually beneficial spiritual contract. When the pyramid was sealed, the workers probably felt a strange mix of pride and melancholy. They had spent years on this project. Some arrived as young men and left with gray hair in their hair. Some never left at all. Workers' cemeteries showed tombs for overseers, masons, and laborers buried near the monuments they helped raise. Imagine knowing your bones rest in the shadow of a structure you built, that your life's labor is visible from miles away, that future generations will see your work even if they never know your name. There's something quietly beautiful in that. Now, let's turn our gaze to the present, gently, without breaking the dreamlike mood. The pyramids today are surrounded by drifting sand, tourist pathways, camel rides, postcards, parking lots, and crowds taking selfies at slightly unflattering angles. And yet, despite everything modern life throws at them, they're still serene, immovable, timeless. Each sunrise, the limestone blocks absorb a soft golden glow. Each sunset, the shadow stretches long across the plateau. At night, the stars shimmer above them like the old days, the same constellations ancient priests aligned their compasses to. And somewhere in the quiet desert air, you can almost hear those workers again, not as ghosts, just echoes of human persistence. The rhythmic clack of tools, the chatter of crews, the rustle of rope, the splash of water on sand, the soundscape of effort. The pyramids aren't magical because of mystery. They're magical because they're human. They breathe with the energy of thousands of lives. They stand because people made them stand. And they endure because humans